Welcome back to another episode of the Daily Flip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be flipping through stories about the election. This is a day before the presidential election for 2024. There's no way that we can get around it. At this point, I have been burned out from all the election coverage. I've been trying to cover it ever so lightly, ever so slightly, but now I'm got to come on full force, and we're going to handle the last few changes in the polls, the last few cases for either candidate. So our first article is going to come today from Business Insider. Our second two are going to come from Daily Signal. And then, of course, we'll end today with our Daily Delight, a story meant to leave you feeling positive, ready to take on the day. But that's enough rambling for me. Let's get into our daily debate. And, oh, wait, hold on. Can you guess what the daily debate is? Who's going to win? Duh. At this point, who do you think is going to win? We are close to Election Day. Almost 68 million people have voted ahead of Election Day. So there's probably some relatively good ideas of which way things are going to go in certain counties and certain states. What do you think? Tell me what your projections are. Tell me what you're seeing. Maybe I have a blind spot. But hey, it's not all about me. It's not all about you. There's actually more information out there about the general population now that is getting involved in this election. So let's jump into our first article coming from Business Insider. Like I said, headline reads, the U.S. presidential election is 2 days away, and that's as of today because I'm recording on Sunday. Here's where things stand. So if we're to really take a step back, I have said for a while now, I feel like the election is Kamala Harris's to lose. And things have shifted ever since I have made those statements ever so boldly in the beginning of October. I feel as though she's began to peter out a little bit. That doesn't mean that she's actually going to lose. I feel as though the momentum, the Kamala love that was just so ubiquitous, while it still exists out there, it is not as widespread as it was. Everybody kind of got hooked on it's like a trend. They got hooked on the trend really, really quickly, and now it's kind of gone back to the normal state of things, which is, okay, hey, Trump is bad. And they can say all they want about Kamala Harris, and you can go to her different achievements, whether when she was the Attorney General of California, when she was in the Senate as VP, and you can list all of those things out. But a lot of the arguments that I've heard more recently are still anti-Trump arguments. And that's not that they didn't exist before. That's just saying that it's reverting to the mean. Because guess what? The argument under Joe Biden for a lot of people was, hey, I don't necessarily love all of his policies. He did do some good things, but at the end of the day, it's about making sure that Donald Trump doesn't get in there. Donald Trump is a bad candidate. And I feel as though Kamala, she had her moment. She has her talking points. And people still go out there and say, hey, these are what she's trying to do, whether it be the income credit, the tax credit to help underserved communities, whether it's to help first-time homeowners, whether it's the child tax credit, whether it's her border policy, which is more in line with the center, the average American, at least from what she says out loud on the campaign trail. All these sort of things are out there, and she's using them every once in a while, but a lot of the arguments I still hear are, but hey, the real problem is Donald Trump. And that feels like a reversion to the mean. That feels like it's not actually pro-Kamala, it's just anti-Trump. And that means that if it's no longer pro-Kamala, maybe they've lost some people in the center. Maybe they even lost some Democrats who are saying, hey, I don't want Trump to get in, but I'm going to put my vote somewhere else because I can't vote for Kamala because now the wave has faded and the momentum has kind of simmered. If, you were cooking it up, you had it on 10 there for a little bit, you were starting to get the boil, or you were starting to get that nice burnt smell from some of your food, you're starting to caramelize something, and now it's cranked down to a 6 and it's just kind of searing a little bit. It's just kind of going along nice and slow. You're not on a full cook anymore. She ain't cooking, as some people would say. But that doesn't mean it's not true. It doesn't mean that she has no chance of winning. It doesn't mean that what I mean by it's not true is that the love and the passion for her wasn't real. It just means that it was something that was more trend-based and, oh, this is our new candidate, we have to get behind him based, than, oh, we actually love Kamala Harris. But let's go into what Business Insider has to say to dive a little bit deeper in there. Quote, throughout the campaign, Trump has benefited from unease over the economy, a consistent top issue for voters. When President Joe Biden was the presumptive Democratic nominee, it was his biggest vulnerability, despite low unemployment and consistent job gains after the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, let's pause here. Yes, I think you could make a great argument about low unemployment and being able to actually jack up some of the interest rates and slowly bring down inflation, though it's not exactly where people want it to be. I think Jerome Powell will be credited if things don't fall down from here, if it continues on this trend line. He will be credited with the quote unquote slow landing. He will be credited with it in the history books, and there's no doubt about it. There's multiple factors besides unemployment. I mean, whether it comes down to gas prices and how much Saudi and the OPEC nations are willing to actually produce, all those things are going to be very important factors in the inflation, because guess what? If oil prices are extremely high, then everything's very high. We experienced this ourselves during the late 70s. So the point being that there are other factors than just unemployment and the interest rates that the Fed's charging. But like I said, it has been a very, very slow recoup. It's a little bit of stagnation. We're still dealing with higher inflation, but it wasn't the absolute crash that some people feared would be coming in order to correct the inflation or the large, large jump in unemployment. Now, can you actually credit Joe Biden with all these extra jobs? In theory, you can. The breakdown is a little bit of regained jobs, and a lot of people are actually taking on more partial work time jobs rather than full hour jobs, and also a lot of them are in government sectors. So the breakdown doesn't necessarily seem favorable when you actually look at the jobs that are being created or the job that people are getting. Because if you say, well, hey, in 2020, there were 30,000 jobs. And this is not true, obviously. It's a very low number. But we're going to say there are 30,000 jobs. And then the pandemic hits. It goes down to 10,000 jobs, because those are the amount of essential workers. Then you come back to 2024 and you say, hey, look, we're at 29,000, or even we're at 32,000 jobs. Well, one, you're just getting back close to that initial number that you had. And even in the case where it's 32,000 jobs and there's a little bit of job growth, well, there should have been a natural job growth from the 2020 era before COVID hit and 2024 anyway. So are you actually really bringing that back to the table? Obviously, you can mismanage the economy and not bring back those jobs, but can you really, really get credit for bringing back those jobs when they had already existed before? You get a little bit of mix up. Like I said, he could have completely mismanaged it, caused an absolute downturn in the economy, though it probably would have been something that Jerome Powell and the Fed were dealing with more than him. But then again, Joe Biden kept Jerome Powell in there. But the point being that, can you really give a person that much credit for it? Not necessarily. So you can see why that was indeed a big vulnerability for anybody going up against Donald Trump, who was a part of this administration. Now, if you have an outsider like Gavin Newsom, he's going to bring different facts to the table. He doesn't have to defend the record of the White House like a Joe Biden or Kamala Harris does. But that's the reality that they have to live with. It was underneath their administration. They even called it Biden inflation. So, like, the name is on it. At least they didn't call it Kamala inflation or Harris inflation. I don't know what they would have called it in those cases, because they probably would have come up with something a little bit more zingy than Biden inflation. But his name is on it. So there's no getting around it at this point. But let's go on to the next set of facts. Quote, after Biden stepped aside as the nominee in July and Harris became the Democratic Party standard bearer, she immediately focused on the issue, vowing to attack price gouging and unveiling a broad economic plan of her own. It wasn't long before Harris began to narrow the gap between the Democrats and the GOP in the presidential race. Now, in its finals days, the race remains tight, with both candidates virtually tied in the swing states as they make their last appeals to voters. And there was actually a very interesting point that I had heard from a progressive commentator, which is her numbers were really good at the beginning when she was talking about this price gouging that the companies were participating in, where she was talking about possibly fixing prices in order to make sure that people don't have to pay over a certain amount for, eggs, milk, whatever it may be in the future. And the progressive commentator went on to say, and as she started to kind of make her message a little bit more appealing to the center, she's actually started to, quote unquote, lose market share. She started to have worse numbers in the polls. The gaps have closed. And I don't necessarily, correlation is not causation. So just because she moved to more centrist issues, that doesn't mean that her poll numbers went down. There could have been many other factors. One, people didn't necessarily know her too much, and she went out on the campaign trail more, and then they got more FaceTime with her, and they realized they didn't like what she was saying. Instead of it coming out of an official post on social media or official memorandum or different letters saying this is what my policy issue is, but seeing her on the campaign trail talking about it. It could also be, like I talked at the beginning, the momentum just started to wither. that it started to slow down a little bit, and that's why our poll numbers changed. And that's why I thought when this comment came out from the progressive commentator, your analysis could be true. It could be that people really care about price gouging, and they really care about making sure that the prices are fixed when they go to the store. And I'm sure that actually does very well appeal to a lot of people, because they hear it in theory and they say, hey, yeah, no, I want to make sure that I don't have to pay over a certain price for this. But then you either explain it to them, or they just remember their basic economics lesson, or maybe even their social, because I think you could cover this in your like social studies and history lessons as well, because I did, in history in class we covered some economic stuff, some of the policies that presidents had implemented in the past and other countries had implemented in the past. And you remember, well, actually, hold on, was price fixing actually necessarily a good thing for parts of the economy? Not necessarily. Then again, we do it in our own agricultural segment. So with more time, people are able to fully examine it. They're able to hear counter arguments. They're also able to think it through on their own. Because, yeah, when you first hear that, you say, hey, for that Apple iPhone, you're never going to have to pay over $500. You're like, yeah, sick, let's do it. And then you think about it, like, wait, okay, does that mean that they're not going to make as much money? Does that mean they can't do R&D anymore? Does that mean they're not going to be able to develop new products? Does that mean that the quality is going to get a little bit cruddier because the government is telling them they have to sell it at $500, so now they're going to try to make a phone that's $500 versus one that used to be at a quote-unquote free market price of $999? Those are all the points that people start to ruminate on and start to think about. So while I think the progressive commentator could have been right that those things resonated with the people, I don't necessarily think it was the whole reason that her numbers started to slip as she started to talk about them less. And also, she needed to appeal to the middle American, because guess what? When you open up the conversation about price fixing, you open up the conversation about socialism. And there are plenty of other things that lots of people will claim are socialism within the United States of America, but price fixing was one of the big things that you learn about in the Soviet Union, how they actually limited or forced companies to sell goods at certain prices. And that is, whether or not you agree that it's 100% socialism or not, which is direct government interference / involvement in the market, but that happens all over the place. So you can make arguments that we already do things along those lines, which is fair enough. But it still opens up that line of attack because it sounds like socialism, and we have a deep fear of the word socialism and communism in this country. Whether or not it's rationally founded or not, and I think you can make lots of arguments for it being semi-rational and the other part of it being irrational, it is a deep fear that we have. So you open yourself up to those sort of attacks when you have programs like that in place, which means you're probably going to have to veer away from it for the middle American, who in theory likes the word capitalism and likes the word free markets, even if they understand that on some level it's not a completely free market that we operate in nowadays. So let's go down to before we move on to the next article, I want to go into a little bit of a breakdown of the swing states. Quote, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin from a critical core of the blue wall of states that backed Democratic presidential nominees from 1992 until 2012, but have more recently been less reliable for Democrats. So the blue wall, that is Kamala's strategy. That is also Mr. Trump's strategy. They're going for the Pennsylvania especially, but they're still going for the Wisconsins. They're still going for the Michigans. They're trying to tackle these ones. Arizona got thrown on there for a little bit in the Sun Belt. Don't forget your Carolinas, your Georgias, and then Nevada was kind of sprinkled in there as well. So all of these guys are mixed in. But let's talk about the blue wall states specifically. Quote, the three states which both Harris and Trump have crisscrossed in their hunt for votes contain urban, suburban, and rural areas that will be key for each candidate in the race. And here is the electoral breakdown for both, for all of them. So Pennsylvania, you got 19. For Michigan, you got 15. Wisconsin, you have 10. And then also they throw in here Nebraska's second, which is just one electoral vote. But that, that's still important to some degree. But let's hear about a little bit of the background between 2016 and 2020. Quote, in 2016, Trump breached the blue wall, winning all three states by making inroads with working-class voters that had previously supported former President Barack Obama. And then we skip down a little bit. Quote, but in 2020, Biden flipped the blue wall states back into the Democratic column, but only narrowly. That year, Biden also won Nebraska's Omaha-anchored 2nd District, end quote. So what is this actually saying? Are the voting people in these states that are working class going to go for Kamala or go for Donald Trump? this is a tricky one because Kamala is definitely pro-union, but in California, the most powerful unions, while don't get me wrong, there are very powerful unions for blue-collar workers. A lot of them are, the actors, so SGA, the Actors Guild, the Writers Guild, the Education slash Teachers Union. A lot of those really powerful unions out there. She supported those, and they kind of are a beautiful little. I don't want to say parasitic organism because that makes them sound bad, but their cooperation benefits one another there with the Democratic Party. So those are she's definitely pro-union, but it's hard to see it as someone like Scranton Joe, Delaware Joe, who has been, though he has been big businesses kind of guy, he is also kind of seen as that rustic middle American who can relate more to the everyday worker. Now, then again, Trump is a New Yorker and Kamala is a Californian. I would say you could see a little bit more with some of the New Yorker vibe, the hardworking New Yorker vibe. You could see that resonate more with people who are in these blue-collar jobs in these 3 states than you could a Californian coming over from the West Coast. But I don't necessarily know. Because, let's be clear, Trump in general is less pro-union than Kamala Harris is. But it doesn't necessarily matter about their policies so much. And I would disagree as a person who likes to vote on policies, or at least takes them into consideration, though vibe is, of course, a big thing. But the point being that these people, they vote on policies for sure, especially with promises about bringing manufacturing back to the United States. That's why they loved Trump in 2016. But also there is a certain vibe, and they look to the people that they can resonate with and who speak to their issues. And Joe Biden definitely did speak to those union issues more than Trump did. And he did more for unions, especially how he stacked the NLRB. He did more for unions in his time, and you can see why people resonated with him. And now with Kamala, I don't know if that support necessarily translates the same way that it would to Biden. But that is the tricky one. I think, honestly, the Sunbelt states, everybody's like, oh, they matter so much. It does. They don't. I definitely think they do. I think Georgia is probably going to go Trump's way. I think that the Carolinas, it's going to be split, obviously. It's going to be hard. I think they go Trump's way ever so slightly. Arizona, I'm still out on. Nevada, I think, goes Trump's way. I think Nebraska second obviously goes Kamala's way, and I really think that the walls up there, I think Michigan is going to go Kamala's way. I think Wisconsin's probably going to go Trump's way, and I think Pennsylvania, I really don't know on Pennsylvania. Also, let's be clear, all of these are provisional. Like I've looked at some of the polling, I've seen some of the talking points after people have put out their mail-in ballots or their absentee ballots. So none of this is guaranteed. This is not like, oh, I have a professional opinion. I've done all the extra research. This is my gut vibe based on what I've been hearing from people that operate in some of those states, some of the events I've been seeing in some of those states. And obviously, I have my own filter that sends information my way. So it obviously is tainted to some degree. I think, honestly, Pennsylvania is probably going to go to Kamala Harris, and I think it's going to be ever so tight. But right now, I think it's going towards Kamala, and I think it is still her election to lose, though the momentum has been slowing down. But that's enough on all of that. So let's actually get into our second article, which comes from, both of our next articles come from the Daily Signal. But this first one is the final argument. The headline literally reads, "Final Argument, an open and shut case." And this writer is Ben Shapiro, so he's going to make the same claims that you've heard him make for quite some time now if you listen to him on the regular, or you listen to anybody who is a commentator who criticizes what Ben Shapiro says. He's a big name at this point, so you can't really get through a cycle without hearing some sort of points from him. But let's go into what he's saying here more specifically. Quote, "The conversation was moderated by Barry Weiss of the Free Press." He's talking about a conversation that he had advocating for Trump, and he was going up against Sam Harris, who is advocating for Kamala. Quote, "Sam Harris is, of course, an incredibly intelligent person. He's also a person with a core set of values. He freely acknowledged his own discomfort with many of Kamala Harris's positions in the campaign. But in the end, he said that he would vote for Harris because of one dispositive argument. Trump cannot be president, thanks to his antics surrounding the election in 2020. And then Ben goes on to say, "I took on the opposite view." Quote, "While freely acknowledging that Trump's behavior between November 4th, 2020 and January 6th, 2021 was wrong, I argue that the constitutional checks and balances had held and would continue to do so. What is more, I argue Trump should be elected because his presidency was far more successful for America than her vice presidency." End quote. Now, So one of those arguments resonates and probably resonate with a lot of people that Trump's presidency was better than her vice presidency. At least for and you obviously, COVID is a big stain on both of their presidencies, but people were better off economically for a majority of Trump's term and versus during her vice presidency and his and Joe Biden's presidency. People have been worse off for a majority of that time. Even if one is technically both of those situations were caused by COVID, but for a majority of the either, how should I say, for a majority of either of their presidencies, the conditions were better in one case, worse in another. And you can say chalk that up to COVID, but that doesn't mean you can just throw it aside and say, "Oh, yeah, nope, it's not important." I mean, that you have to deal with it as it is. People have raw emotions about it. Some people are still struck by the fact that they had to live under a COVID regime and they absolutely hated and they liked Trump's approach more, even though he did many things that lots of people didn't like during that too. So don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to outwardly say, "Oh, well, one did better under COVID or another," but people definitely have feelings one way or another. Can't deny that, and it's going to affect how they go through looking at this election. And like I said, in a majority of Trump's term, he's doing better. Now, the second argument that does not resonate with me is the constitutional guardrails that were up. Great, yes, the constitutional guardrails did hold against Trump doing his thing and trying to come out on top even after everything seemed to be wrapped up in the 2020 election. But is that a good argument? Is that I don't get me wrong, I understand the rationality of it, which is the Constitution did its job. The constitutional protections that we have in place did their job, and they made sure that he did not get in. But do you want to have to bet on that in the future? Not necessarily. Now, do I actually think that Donald Trump would try to coup his way to the presidency? No. I genuinely do not believe that. And I think that he has a hard time admitting to himself that he actually lost, but I also truly believe that if he believed it, he would not. It's complicated. He's a complicated person. I think he can convince himself of almost anything, but I don't necessarily think that he is so egotistical that he believes he's the only person that can properly guide the nation and that he would actually do a full-on coup in order to maintain his power going forward and keep going after this presidency. Because that is the argument that you would go after. Okay? If you really think if you thought what he did on January 6th was really bad and it scared you and it made you think he can never be a president again, that's fair. But also the question is he so egotistical and so obsessed with power that he would continue to hold on to power even after his term is done? Because guess what? He can't run again. He couldn't make the argument that, oh, I won the election and I have the right of the people. He would just have to truly be arrogant enough to believe that he is the all-powerful saint sent down from God in order to continue to be president. And I don't think he is that arrogant in order to believe that. That's why I don't necessarily think that it's as much of a threat as people want to chalk it up to be. But that doesn't mean that the argument that, oh, the constitutional guardrails held is a strong one. Or it's not that it's not a strong one, because there's logic behind it, like I said. But it doesn't mean it's comforting to people that are on the edge about it. But hey, that's enough on that point. Let's get to his very last paragraph, because I found this was a pretty strong indictment of Kamala Harris, at least from his point of view. Quote, "You can argue against Trump, you can argue for him, but nobody can credibly argue in favor of Kamala Harris, not even Kamala Harris," end quote. And I disagree. I really, really disagree. Now, do I like a lot of her policy proposals when she was running in 2020? Do I like a lot of what she did as an AG? Some things about coming down a little bit harder on crime, her being hypocritical about it and actually using some of these people as basically state slave labor. I don't necessarily like that sort of thing. And so there's lots of things back and forth. And some of the things that she says now, I'm like, okay, I understand. I don't think the government should be used that way. But also, I like the sentiment behind it. I like the values that it shows. That doesn't mean I agree with your solution. But I understand that you are diagnosing a problem that I agree with. There are some things like that. When it comes to housing costs, I definitely think that's one. Or when it comes to actually growing the population of America. And then again, she doesn't say it this way, but encouraging people to have more children, which therefore grows the population of America. I agree with the sentiment behind it. She's recognizing the problem, and I agree that that's a problem. I just think her solution to it would be a little bit different. So I think you could make arguments for Kamala Harris that way. Now, can you say that she's the best option for all of those things? Not necessarily. But in some cases, she's bringing it up and Donald Trump isn't. But I think it was a little bit harsh on Ben Shapiro's on Ben Shapiro's side. But also, I understand. It's his job. He is literally putting his money behind Donald Trump. So at this point, he wants to make sure that, one, that he's a credible predictor, because he's been saying that Donald Trump should be winning this one, that his word actually means something, his dollars actually mean something, his effort that he's done in order to go out on the campaign trail for all these other surrogates, or, sorry, not other surrogates, for all these, be a surrogate for all these other candidates, whether it be the senators in Nevada, in Wisconsin, and things like that, Senate candidates, and also House candidates. So, I understand why he's coming out a little bit harsh, but like I said, I think it can be a little bit harsh. So let's go to our final article that also comes from Daily Signal number 2. If you're looking down there in the description below the like and subscribe button, that's where all the articles are. This headline reads, "Who will make the last mistake in this flawed campaign?" And this one centers around the Joe Biden garbage comment. Now, do I believe that he meant it as a quote-unquote Hillary deplorables moment? I genuinely don't know, because I'm not trying to pull the line too much here, because I'm going to criticize Joe Biden, and it's because his brain does not operate at its optimal level. I'm not trying to be mean. I'm not trying to be harsh. It's just true. He is old. So maybe it was a slip up. Maybe he meant to put another word there. Maybe he started his sentence going down the wrong track, and it was like an auto-generating AI that was just trying to put words together. Maybe he didn't mean to have the apostrophe there like the transcript said. I genuinely do not know. But I'll tell you now, devoid of whether or not it was intentful, and I think that he may genuinely believe that to some degree, but either way, and no matter what he intended to do, what should have come out of his mouth, it came out of his mouth, and now we have to deal with the political reality, which is, it is an arrogant, haughty-taughty argument to say that the other person's supporters are garbage. It's like saying half of the people that support Trump are deplorables. You're making an overgeneralization. You're basically going to end up stoking people's emotions. You're going to make them furious, angry. How dare you talk down to me? They're going to stoke the populism that has been brewing within our nation, the populism versus elitism. People already frame it this way. I've talked to so many people over the course of the last few years, and how they frame it is they won't let you. Oh, you can't do that. They'll come after you. Who's they? Oh, well, the elites, the system, so on and so forth. It is so deeply ingrained in so many people's minds that you say, oh yeah, they're listening. They'll know what you mean. Like, some people will think you're absolutely freaking insane. And let's be clear, I ask that question sometimes to people, not thinking they're insane, and they probably think I think they're insane, because I'm like, who's they? And they're looking at me like, oh, this guy thinks I'm crazy. I'm like, no, I want to understand what you mean by they, because on some level, I agree, like in theory, I don't actually necessarily think they're listening to me, but like, you gotta make a joke as a framing, like it's them versus us, it's the average person versus those upper tier bureaucrats and people who have access to all the market/money managers on Wall Street, who can choose where money is invested, who can actually talk to the Fed chairs and change policy, or at least possibly have a long discussion about easing certain rates in certain areas. So my point being that this is already embedded to some degree in the American populace. It has always been the powerful versus the weak. We've always had that mentality. I mean, we literally use it as a framing as a propaganda framing in order to push away from Britain and secede from Britain when we were first founded as a nation. It is deeply, deeply embedded in our ethic. And when you make comments like that and you just are derisive, it is not going to go over well. And I don't necessarily think it's going to be the thing that throws the campaign over the edge, but it just doesn't help. So as we go into this next election day, and I'm going to go to our daily delight, of course, because I want to end on a positive note, but that doesn't mean that I don't want to say this next part. As we go into this election day, in theory, everything should be done on the day of, because like I said, 68 million people have already submitted their ballots. In theory, that is so that's a little bit less than half. It's probably 40%, because last time I think we had 160 million people, 162 million votes, if I'm not mistaken. So that's probably about 40-ish% of the people that vote. So the rest of the votes coming in on the day of, that should be feasible. That should be possible to count on the day of. Then again, I know certain counties are doing hand counting, which may take longer rather than using machines. I know there are lots of different lawsuits that are already pending ahead of time from GOP, DNC, all that. So I'm not trying to pretend as though it will 100% be done. But in theory, it should be done in one day. But if it's not okay, and we definitely need to fix it moving forward, but that doesn't mean you can just freak out and everything ends, okay? Go into this time being kind to your neighbors. No matter who wins, the world will continue to go on. The world will continue to spin. Your neighbor will still be your neighbor. That person that brings you bread, who may disagree with you on your politics, but brings you bread at your church, is very nice. Your church community will still be the same. Your Pilates class, no matter what anybody believes, you're still going to go in there and have a great time and enjoy the presence of everybody else. We need to obviously bring down the temperature. And everybody says, bring down the temperature. The only way to bring down the temperature, besides talking about rhetoric, is just to do it yourself. You have to be the change that you want to see. So if you disagree with somebody, don't necessarily get in a loud argument with them. Actually hear them out, care about their opinion. And even if you can't see past it and you think they're so wrong and you think they're arrogant about it and they're talking down to you, just be the bigger, better person. And obviously acknowledge that you can talk down to people too. None of us are perfect, and the system that we create here on earth in order to choose who governs us can't be perfect either. There's going to be some issues. There are going to be some flaws. That doesn't mean that there's a systemic problem everywhere. But hey, that's enough with all of that. Go into this election day happy, and I'm sure I will catch you on the back end of this. I'll catch you on Wednesday, and we'll have, hopefully, the results, at least the preliminary ones, out there for you. We'll probably do a poll breakdown of state by state, and I'll be watching it pretty diligently as we go into Tuesday. So, with that said, let's jump into our daily delight. This one comes from Scoopworthy. A dramatic chicken comes knocking at a couple's door, and this chicken, okay, so basically this chicken says to there's a boyfriend and a girlfriend, they live on like a farm, and the chicken comes to the door, knocks on the door, and gets the boyfriend to walk her to her to her den every single night to get her, and it's absolutely cute. It's absolutely adorable. The girl chicken's a little bit sassy, like, hey, whoa, why do I have to walk all the way over here in order for you to get me back into my coop? Okay, come on now. And it's absolutely hilarious, and it's some funny photos, some funny videos. So if you want to check out this article, or you want to read any of today's articles, all of them will be linked in the description below that like and subscribe button. Also down there you can find the podcast on Spotify, Pocket Cast, and Podvine, as well as the 6 and 6 podcast that will come out on Tuesday and Thursday over here at the same RSS feeds that you can find down there, or at the YouTube channel, or on Tuesday and Thursday. If you go to the Twitter handle at your DailyFlip, which is also in the description, you can find the Twitter tirade, which is a little bit off the top of the head, random topics where we just kind of just rant. We just kind of do a tirade, because that's the whole point, and that's over there, no more than like 10 minutes. So if you want to check out any of that stuff, you can go all down there in the description. But with all that said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe, don't die.